I always believed that in a marriage, your partner's family automatically becomes your family. You support them, you care for them, and you show up without hesitation when things get tough. So, when my husband of 4 years practically begged me on his hands and knees to let his destitute, homeless cousin move into our spare bedroom, I did what any loving, supportive wife would do. I opened my doors. I just didn't realize I was inviting a parasite directly into my sanctuary. It all started on a random Tuesday evening. Mark came home from work looking completely frantic and exhausted. He barely even took his shoes off before he slumped onto the living room sofa, buried his face in his hands, and let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. When I sat down next to him and asked him what was wrong, he looked up at me with these big, pleading puppy dog eyes. "It's my cousin, Lily," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "She just lost her job at her marketing firm, and her landlord officially evicted her this morning. She has absolutely zero savings, no close friends in the city, and nowhere else to go. She's terrified." I frowned, trying hard to place the name. Mark had a massive extended family, but I couldn't recall ever meeting a Lily at our wedding, our engagement party, or any of the chaotic Thanksgiving dinners. When I pointed this out, Mark quickly brushed it off, explaining that she was a distant second cousin from his mother's side who had moved away years ago, and they had only recently reconnected online. "Please, honey," Mark pleaded, reaching out to tightly grip my hands. "I know how much we value our privacy, and I know having a roommate isn't what you signed up for. But she is family. Her blood is my blood. I can't just let her sleep on the streets or in some dangerous homeless shelter. It will only be for a few months until she gets back on her feet. I promise." I was incredibly hesitant. Our beautiful 3-bedroom house was my quiet, peaceful haven. I worked long, stressful hours as a real estate agent, and the thought of a complete stranger disrupting our daily routine made my stomach tie in knots. But looking at the sheer desperation in my husband's eyes, my kind-hearted nature completely took over. I wanted to be a good partner. I wanted to prove that I was the kind of wife who would step up during a family crisis. "Okay," I finally sighed, squeezing his hands back. "She can stay in the guest room. But only until she finds a new job." Mark's face lit up with absolute pure joy. He practically tackled me into a massive hug, kissing my cheek repeatedly and calling me the greatest, most generous wife in the entire world. That weekend, I went completely out of my way to make sure this girl felt comfortable and welcome. I spent hours deep cleaning the guest bedroom, making the bed with my expensive Egyptian cotton sheets, and I even went to the store to put together a little welcome basket. I filled it with high-end shampoo, luxury bath bombs, and fluffy new towels. I truly thought I was doing a noble, selfless deed for a relative in need. Looking back now, I wish I had locked my front door and permanently thrown away the key. Because the woman who stepped onto my porch with her suitcases the following Monday wasn't a desperate, grieving victim of circumstance. She was a calculated nightmare. When I opened my front door that Monday evening, I was fully expecting to see a woman broken by life. I was mentally prepared to comfort a stressed, exhausted girl who had just lost everything. Instead, standing on my porch was a stunning, perfectly manicured 20-something holding 2 massive, heavy designer suitcases. Her hair was flawlessly styled, her makeup was immaculate, and she smelled strongly of an incredibly expensive, heavy perfume. She didn't look like someone who had just been evicted. She looked like she had just stepped out of a high-end salon. "You must be the wife," Lily said, looking me up and down with a strange, calculating expression. She didn't say, "Thank you for letting me stay." She didn't even offer a polite smile. She just pushed past me, dragging her heavy luggage across my pristine hardwood floors. I brushed off her cold demeanor, blaming it on the stress of her situation. I showed her to the freshly cleaned guest room, proudly pointing out the welcome basket and the Egyptian cotton sheets. Lily just glanced at it, casually tossed her designer bag onto the bed, and sighed. "It's a bit cramped, and I usually prefer silk sheets for my skin, but I guess I can make this work." I stood there, completely stunned by the sheer audacity. But before I could say anything, Mark rushed into the room, eagerly grabbing her suitcases to help her unpack. The way his face lit up around her made my stomach drop slightly, but I forced a smile and went to the kitchen to finish cooking the welcome dinner I had spent 2 hours preparing. That dinner was the absolute longest, most agonizing meal of my entire life. From the moment she sat down at my dining table, Lily acted like she was a VIP guest at a terrible restaurant, and I was just the incompetent waitress. She picked at the roasted chicken I made, making a disgusted face. "Oh, Mark didn't tell you? I have a very strict organic, gluten-free diet," she said, pushing her plate away. "But it's fine. I'm sure your simple cooking is great for people who don't care about their figures." I shot a glaring look at Mark, expecting him to defend me. Instead, he just let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, Lily has always been a health nut, honey. Don't take it personally. Things only got worse after dinner." I went to the kitchen to clean up the dishes, a chore Mark usually helped me with. But tonight, he immediately went to the living room with Lily. When I finally finished scrubbing the pans and walked into the living room to relax, I froze. My husband was sitting on our plush velvet sofa, and Lily was sitting right next to him. Not on the other cushion, but right next to him, their thighs completely pressed together. She had taken the TV remote, my TV remote, and changed the channel from the real estate show I always watched on Mondays to some trashy reality show. As they watched TV, Lily kept leaning into Mark's personal space. Every time he made a joke, she would laugh way too loudly, throwing her head back and playfully slapping his chest or letting her hand linger on his knee for just a second too long. I stood in the doorway, feeling like a complete stranger in my own home. My heart was pounding and a sick, anxious feeling started bubbling in my chest. They just reconnected online, I reminded myself. Why is she touching him like they've been intimate for years? When I awkwardly cleared my throat and sat down in the single armchair across from them, Lily didn't move an inch away from him. She just gave me a sweet, innocent smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. That night, lying in bed while Mark was fast asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I desperately tried to gaslight myself. I kept repeating in my head that I was just being a paranoid, jealous, and ungracious host. I told myself that they were just family, that some families are naturally touchy-feely, and that I was completely overthinking it. I tried to convince myself that my gut feeling was wrong. But the horrific truth was, my nightmare was only just beginning. 3 days passed. 3 days of Lily leaving her dirty dishes in the sink, draining my expensive hot water with hour-long showers, and constantly finding pathetic excuses to touch my husband. I was running on zero sleep and pure, suffocating anxiety. But the absolute breaking point, the exact moment that shattered every naive illusion I had left, happened on Thursday night. It was around 1 a.m. I woke up with a painfully dry throat. I quietly slipped out from under the covers, careful not to wake Mark, who was snoring heavily on his side of the bed, and made my way downstairs to get a glass of ice water. The house was completely pitch black, except for the pale, cold light spilling out from the open refrigerator door in the kitchen. As I walked into the room, rubbing my tired eyes, I saw Lily standing by the kitchen island, casually pouring herself a glass of juice. But it wasn't the juice that made me freeze dead in my tracks. My heart violently dropped into my stomach. My blood ran completely cold. She wasn't wearing the baggy sweatpants she had arrived in. She was wearing my clothes. But not just any clothes. She was wearing the custom-made, incredibly expensive, crimson-red silk nightgown that I had bought specifically for Mark and I's upcoming 5-year wedding anniversary. It was an extremely intimate, revealing piece of lingerie that I kept hidden in the very back of the top drawer of my private dresser, inside the master bedroom. There was absolutely no way she could have accidentally stumbled upon it. To get that nightgown, she had to have walked into my bedroom while I was gone, opened my private drawers, and deliberately dug through my things. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking with a dangerous mix of pure shock and rising, uncontrollable anger. Lily didn't jump. She didn't gasp, apologize, or try to awkwardly cover herself up like a normal person caught red-handed. Instead, she slowly turned around, took a slow sip of her juice, and looked me dead in the eyes. The crimson silk clung tightly to her body. The deep lace neckline was completely, wildly inappropriate for any guest to wear in someone else's house, let alone around their cousin. "Oh, hey," Lily whispered, her tone completely flat and utterly unbothered. She casually traced the delicate lace on the chest with her manicured fingers. "I hope you don't mind. The guest room was a little warm, and I couldn't find my sleepwear. I just grabbed the first comfortable thing I saw." "You went into my master bedroom," I stated, taking a firm step forward, my fingernails digging painfully into my palms. "You dug through my private dresser. Take it off. Right now." Lily smirked. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a cold, calculated, mocking smirk that sent a terrifying chill straight down my spine. She didn't back away. Instead, she took a step closer to me, completely invading my personal space. "Mark told me to make myself at home," she whispered softly, her eyes flashing with absolute, undeniable defiance. "He said I could borrow whatever I needed. We're family after all. What's yours is his, and what's his is mine. Right?" She didn't even wait for my response. She just gave me one last condescending look, casually turned around, and walked back toward the staircase, her hips swaying deliberately as the silk trailed behind her. I stood completely alone in the dark, silent kitchen. My entire body was shaking with a blinding, suffocating rage. I realized in that exact moment that I wasn't dealing with a disrespectful, poor relative. I was dealing with a predator who was actively trying to mark her territory in my home. The next morning, I was a walking zombie. I hadn't slept a single wink after the kitchen incident. I just sat at the kitchen island, clutching a cold mug of coffee, waiting for the two of them to wake up. I had my speech fully prepared. I was going to demand boundaries, and I fully expected my husband to be just as horrified as I was that his cousin had rummaged through my intimate lingerie. Around 8 a.m., Mark strolled into the kitchen, looking completely refreshed. A few minutes later, Lily followed, now wearing her designer sweats again, acting as if the bizarre midnight confrontation had never even happened. I didn't waste any time. The second Mark took a sip of his coffee, I dropped the bomb. I told him exactly what happened at 1 a.m. I told him that his cousin had invaded our master bedroom, gone through my private dresser, and paraded around our kitchen in the crimson silk nightgown I had bought for our anniversary. I waited for the shock. I waited for Mark to turn to Lily and demand an explanation. Instead, he slowly put his coffee mug down, let out a massive, dramatic sigh, and looked at me like I was the one who had just committed a terrible crime. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" Mark groaned, rubbing his temples in annoyance. I blinked, completely caught off guard. "Doing what?" "Mark, she went into my private, her clothes were in the wash, honey." Mark snapped, his voice suddenly aggressive, echoing loudly off the kitchen tiles. "She mentioned last night that she didn't have any clean sleepwear, so I told her she could borrow something of yours. It was just a misunderstanding." She grabbed the first piece of fabric she saw in the dark. "It's not a big deal." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. "Mark, it was folded underneath my regular clothes in the very back of the drawer. She had to dig for it. And when I confronted her, she smirked at me." At this point, Lily chimed in. She immediately dropped her cold, arrogant attitude from the night before and put on the most pathetic, trembling voice I had ever heard. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she sniffled, looking down at the floor, forcing a fake tear to pool in her eyes like a wounded puppy. "I didn't mean to cause trouble in your marriage. I know she hates me. I'll just pack my bags and go sleep at a bus stop tonight." That was all it took. Mark completely lost his mind. He turned his anger entirely on me. "Look what you're doing," he yelled, pointing an accusing finger directly at my face. "You are being incredibly petty and selfish over a stupid piece of fabric. You have a massive closet full of clothes, and you're throwing a hysterical tantrum because a homeless family member borrowed one? Are you seriously jealous of my own cousin? Because if you are, that is absolutely sick, twisted, and honestly, it makes me question everything about you." I sat there, completely paralyzed by the sheer, terrifying audacity of his gaslighting. He was twisting reality so flawlessly. He was aggressively flipping the script, painting me as a cruel, insanely jealous monster, while Lily played the innocent, abused victim. "Apologize to her," Mark demanded, his voice cold and authoritative. "Apologize right now for making her feel unsafe in her own family's home." Every fiber of my being wanted to scream. I wanted to smash my coffee mug on the floor, flip the kitchen island, and physically throw them both out into the street. But as I looked at Mark's fiercely defensive eyes, and then noticed the tiny, triumphant, mocking smirk hiding in the corner of Lily's mouth, a sudden, terrifying clarity washed over me. If I fought them now, they would just label me crazy. They would become more secretive, and I would never find out what was actually going on in my own house. So, I took a deep breath. I swallowed every ounce of my pride, and I did the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my entire life. I looked dead into Lily's eyes, forced a tight, fake smile, and said, "You know what? You're right. I'm just stressed from work. I completely overreacted, and I am so sorry." Mark instantly relaxed, letting out a breath of relief and praising me for finally acting like an adult. But as I turned around to wash my mug, listening to the two of them happily resume their breakfast, a cold, dark resolve settled deep in my chest. I wasn't actually sorry. I had just stopped being a naive wife, and I was about to start acting like a detective. That forced apology was the most bitter pill I have ever had to swallow, but it worked flawlessly. Mark and Lily completely dropped their guard. Because I had folded so easily, they genuinely believed they had broken me into submission. They thought I was just a naive, insecure wife who had been successfully put back in her place. But while they were busy playing their sick little game of house, I stopped participating. I became a ghost in my own home. I stopped arguing, I stopped complaining, and I started observing. They say a woman's intuition is a terrifying superpower once she finally stops ignoring it. And once I stopped actively gaslighting myself to protect my marriage, the red flags weren't just waving, they were practically on fire. The first undeniable sign was my perfume. I own a very specific, $300 signature fragrance that I only wear on special occasions. By the end of Lily's first week in our house, the bottle was mysteriously half empty. Worse than that, when Mark came to bed one night after helping Lily fix the Wi-Fi in the guest room, I could smell the faint, unmistakable floral notes lingering on his collar. When I casually brought it up the next morning, he didn't even blink. He just casually claimed Lily must have bought the same cheap knockoff brand at the mall. Then, there was the undeniable geography of my bedroom. I couldn't stop obsessing over the silk nightgown incident. My heavy oak dresser has 6 drawers. The lingerie is folded away and hidden in the very back of the top drawer, buried underneath thick winter sweaters. If Lily was truly just stumbling around in the dark looking for a random, baggy t-shirt to sleep in, why would she bypass the easy, accessible drawers? Why did she go straight for the hardest to reach, most intimate item? The answer made my blood run cold, because she knew exactly where it was. She had been in that room before. In the daylight. And she wasn't alone. But the most sickening confirmation came from watching their body language when they thought I wasn't paying attention. During dinner, I started adopting a new strategy. I would keep my head down, pretending to be completely engrossed in scrolling through work emails on my phone. But I wasn't reading. I had my phone screen turned off, using the dark, reflective glass as a mirror to watch them across the table. What I saw made me want to vomit. I saw the way Mark's eyes would hungrily trace her neckline when she leaned over her plate. I saw the subtle, deliberate brushes of their hands when passing the salt shaker. I even caught the faint shifting of the tablecloth that proved their legs were constantly intertwined underneath the table. You do not look at your second cousin with that kind of predatory hunger. You do not play footsie with your blood relative while your wife sits less than 3 feet away. The math wasn't matching, and the horrifying reality was finally staring me right in the face. This woman wasn't his cousin. I didn't know exactly who she was yet, but I knew she was his mistress, and my husband had brought her into my home, eating my food and sleeping under my roof, just so he could have his cake and eat it too. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't pack a bag and run away to my mother's house like a victim. Instead, I smiled sweetly, poured them both more wine, and kissed my husband on the cheek before going up to bed. Behind my perfectly curated smile, the loving, trusting wife he married was completely, permanently dead. Now, I just needed undeniable, bulletproof evidence. And I knew exactly how I was going to get it. I needed undeniable, bulletproof proof. And thanks to next-day delivery, that proof arrived at my office in a small, discreet brown box just 24 hours later. Inside were 3 high-definition, motion-activated micro-spy cameras. They were incredibly tiny, perfectly disguised as USB phone chargers and a small digital clock. I just had to wait for the perfect window of opportunity to set my trap. My chance came on Thursday afternoon when Mark texted me saying he was taking his cousin out to run some errands and show her around the city. The second I knew they were out of the house, I left work early, rushed home, and went straight to work. I was extremely strategic about where I placed the lenses. I put the digital clock camera right on the living room bookshelf, giving me a perfect, unobstructed view of the velvet sofa. I plugged one of the USB cameras into the kitchen wall facing the island, and the last one at the end of the main hallway. I deliberately avoided the master bedroom, the guest room, and the bathrooms. Why? Because I'm not an idiot. I've watched enough true crime and legal dramas to know that recording someone in a space where they have a reasonable expectation of privacy is highly illegal in my state. If I recorded them in the bedroom, a judge could throw the evidence out, or worse, they could sue me. But the living room and the kitchen? Those are common areas in my house. Whatever happened there was completely fair game. Once the cameras were synced to a secret app on my phone, I needed to give the rats a reason to come out and play. On Friday morning, while Mark was eating breakfast and Lily was scrolling on her phone across the table, I walked into the kitchen dragging a small, packed suitcase behind me. I put on my best, most convincing, stressed-out working wife performance. "I am so sorry, babe," I sighed heavily, rubbing my forehead. "My real estate agency just called. One of our senior agents got sick, and my boss is forcing me to cover a massive weekend-long open house event 2 cities over. I have to leave right now, and I won't be back until late Sunday night." Mark immediately stood up, walking over to give me a tight, sympathetic hug. "Oh no, honey, that's terrible. Are you sure you can't get out of it?" He sounded so genuinely disappointed. He sounded like a loving husband who was going to miss his wife. But because my face was buried in his shoulder, he didn't realize I could see Lily perfectly in the reflection of the microwave glass. She was practically vibrating in her chair, a huge, triumphant grin spreading across her face. "I can't, babe. I have to go," I said, pulling away and kissing his cheek. "You two have fun. Take care of the house for me. Don't worry about a thing," Mark smiled warmly. "We'll just have a quiet weekend. Drive safe." I got into my car and drove away, watching my beautiful house fade into the rearview mirror. But I didn't get on the highway. I didn't drive 2 cities over. I drove exactly 15 minutes down the road and pulled into the parking lot of a cheap, inconspicuous roadside motel. I checked into a room under my maiden name, locked the deadbolt, sat down on the squeaky mattress, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the live feed from the hidden cameras. My heart was hammering in my chest as the loading circle spun. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for what I was about to see. But honestly, nothing could have truly prepared me for how quickly the masks came off the second they thought I was gone. I sat in that dingy, silent motel room, staring blankly at the loading screen on my laptop. I braced myself for a long, agonizing weekend of watching the cameras, fully expecting them to wait at least a day before doing anything suspicious. But I didn't even have to wait an hour. It took exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes from the moment my car tires left the driveway for my entire marriage to violently implode. A bright red notification pinged on my phone. "Motion detected, living room camera." My hand was physically trembling as I clicked the alert. The feed buffered for a second, the image clearing up to show a perfect, high-definition view of my living room. And there they were. My husband, the man I had stood at the altar with, the man I had cooked dinner for not even 24 hours ago, was aggressively pulling his homeless cousin onto my expensive velvet sofa. They weren't just kissing. They were practically ripping each other's clothes off, completely consumed by each other right in the middle of my house. A wave of pure nausea hit me so hard, I had to grip the edges of the desk to keep from falling out of my chair. But the visual wasn't even the worst part. It was the audio. The microphones on those hidden cameras were absolutely crystal clear. As they briefly pulled apart to catch their breath, Lily giggled. It was a dark, wicked sound. God, I thought she was never going to leave. Lily whined, running her hands through his hair. She is so incredibly annoying. Did you see her face when I wore her stupid silk nightgown? I know, baby, Mark laughed, kissing her neck. But we have the whole house to ourselves until Sunday night. Baby. Not cousin. Baby. And then came the conversation that made the blood in my veins turn entirely to ice. Lily sighed, tracing her finger down his chest. I'm so tired of this, Mark. 2 years. 2 whole years of hiding in cheap motels, and now I have to pretend to be related to you while your uptight wife treats me like a pathetic charity case? When are you finally going to divorce her? Soon, Mark promised smoothly, pulling her closer. We just need to stick to the plan. You know she makes triple what I do. She pays the mortgage, she buys all the groceries, and she covers the utilities. If I leave her now, I'll get screwed in the divorce, and we'll both be broke. Just endure it a little longer. You get to live here completely rent-free, we get to be together every single day under her nose, and my idiot wife is literally working herself to the bone to fund our lifestyle. It's the perfect setup. My idiot wife. I slammed my laptop shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tiny motel room. I rushed into the bathroom, dropped to my knees, and violently threw up my morning coffee into the toilet. My whole body was shaking, gasping for air as the horrific reality of the last 4 years crushed my chest. He didn't just cheat on me. He orchestrated a massive, sickening psychological game. He brought his mistress of 2 years into my sacred sanctuary, gaslighted me into apologizing to her, and planned to bleed my bank accounts dry while they laughed behind my back. I slowly stood up and turned the faucet on, splashing freezing cold water onto my face. I looked up at my pale reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. I honestly thought I would be devastated. I expected to collapse onto the floor, sobbing hysterically and asking the universe why I wasn't enough. But as I stared into my own eyes, there wasn't a single tear. The sadness instantly evaporated, completely swallowed by a cold, dark, and terrifyingly calm rage. The devoted, loving wife who paid his bills and folded his laundry died right there on that motel bathroom floor. And the woman who walked out of that bathroom was a predator, ready to burn his entire pathetic life to the ground. I didn't shed a single tear for the rest of that weekend. While my husband and his mistress were busy treating my living room like a cheap honeymoon suite, I turned that dingy, fluorescent-lit motel room into a war room. I sat back down at my laptop and methodically screen-recorded every single disgusting interaction. I backed up the video files and the crystal-clear audio recordings of their sickening financial scheme, saving them to 3 different secure cloud drives. I built a bulletproof digital vault of evidence that no one could ever deny or delete. When Monday morning rolled around, I didn't go home. I drove straight downtown to the sleek, glass-paneled office of the most ruthless, aggressive divorce attorney in the city, a woman famously known in the legal community as the Shark. I sat in her plush leather chair, handed her my iPad, and played the footage. She didn't even flinch. She just calmly took notes, looked up at me over her designer glasses, and asked, "So, how badly do you want to ruin him?" "Completely," I replied, my voice completely deadpan. Under her strict legal guidance, I began silently amputating Mark from my life. First was the real estate. I had purchased our home 2 years before I even met Mark, and, thanks to my financial prudence, my name was the only one on the deed. The Shark assured me that because it was a premarital asset, he had absolutely no legal claim to my sanctuary. Next was the money. Because I was the primary breadwinner making triple his salary, Mark had grown incredibly comfortable using my credit cards to fund his lifestyle. Not anymore. Within an hour, I had quietly transferred the vast majority of my personal savings into a brand new, private account at an entirely different bank. I didn't freeze the joint credit cards just yet, that would tip him off and ruin my plan, but I did quietly call the bank to drastically lower the spending limits. I turned their financial hemorrhage down to a mere trickle. By the time I finally drove back to my house that Monday evening, my affairs were completely, legally in order. I pulled into the driveway, looked at myself in the rearview mirror, took a deep breath, and prepared to give the Oscar-winning performance of a lifetime. When I unlocked the front door, Mark practically ran over to greet me with a warm, loving kiss, asking how my exhausting work weekend was. Over his shoulder, I saw Lily lounging comfortably on my sofa, sipping my expensive wine, giving me a fake, polite little wave. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my bags at them. I just smiled brightly, hugging my cheating husband tightly. It was so stressful I lied smoothly, resting my chin on his shoulder. But I missed you guys so much. In fact, I feel so terrible for abandoning you two all weekend that I decided I want to do something really special to make up for it. Mark pulled back, raising an eyebrow in surprise. Oh yeah? Like what? My smile widened into something sharp, cold, and incredibly dangerous. I'm going to throw a massive family dinner party this Sunday. I want to officially, properly welcome your cousin to the family. The rest of the week was an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare. Playing the role of the happily oblivious, submissive wife while actively plotting my husband's total destruction required a level of self-control I never even knew I possessed. I went completely all out for this Sunday dinner. I ordered premium cuts of steak, bought a $300 bottle of vintage red wine, and spent hours polishing the good silverware. I wanted this night to be absolutely flawless. I wanted it to be a night that no one in his family would ever forget. But a dinner party isn't a true spectacle without an audience. So I told Mark that if we were going to officially welcome a family member into our home, we needed to do it the right way. I insisted that he invite his parents, my in-laws, and his older sister, Sarah, to join us. At first, I could see a brief flash of genuine panic in Mark's eyes. Obviously, bringing his actual immediate family into the same room as his mistress who was poorly disguised as a distant cousin was an incredibly risky move. He tried to brush the idea off, nervously chuckling and saying that his parents were probably too busy. But I played the sweet, naive wife flawlessly. I gently squeezed his hand and told him how wonderful it would be for his parents to reconnect with their long-lost relative, especially since she had been through such a hard time. Mark's massive, arrogant ego eventually won out. He convinced himself that his lie was bulletproof, and he agreed to invite them. Sunday afternoon arrived, and the atmosphere in the house was sickeningly smug. Lily spent the entire day prancing around my kitchen in a tight dress, pretending to help me prepare the salads. Every time my back was turned, I could see her through the reflection of the oven door, whispering in Mark's ear, grabbing his waist, and smirking at the back of my head. They genuinely believed I was completely broken. They thought I was throwing a lavish party to celebrate my own replacement. At exactly 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron, pasted on my brightest, most welcoming smile, and opened the door. My in-laws and Mark's sister stood on the porch, holding a bouquet of flowers and greeting me with warm hugs. They were incredibly kind people who had always treated me like their own daughter, which made what I was about to do to their son slightly heartbreaking, but entirely necessary. I ushered everyone into the dining room. The table looked like it belonged in a magazine. I directed everyone to their seats, being very strategic with my placement. I made sure Lily was seated directly next to Mark on one side of the table, while his parents and sister sat on the opposite side, directly facing them. As for me, I took the seat at the very head of the table. The seat that gave me a perfect view of everyone's faces and, more importantly, the seat right next to the massive, 65-inch smart TV mounted on the living room wall. Everything looks amazing, honey, Mark said loudly, playing the role of the proud, loving husband for his parents. He stood up, tapping his expensive wine glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. I just want to make a quick toast. As Mark began to loudly praise my cooking and talk about the importance of family supporting each other, I simply smiled, keeping my hands resting quietly in my lap. Underneath the heavy linen tablecloth, my thumb was resting firmly on the play button of my phone, which was already screencast to the living room TV. The trap was perfectly set. The audience was seated. And the absolute biggest bomb of my husband's life was about to detonate right in his face. Mark finished his sickeningly sweet toast to family unity, raised his glass, and took a confident sip of wine. My in-laws smiled and clapped politely, but I noticed Mark's mother, Mary, had been squinting at Lily from across the table ever since we sat down. As Mark took his seat, practically radiating arrogant success, Mary finally set her glass down. She leaned forward, looking completely bewildered. "Mark, sweetheart," Mary started, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "I don't want to be rude, but I simply don't understand. Who exactly is this young woman? You told us she was a distant cousin who needed a place to stay. But we don't have anyone named Lily on my side of the family. And your father certainly doesn't have a niece." The suffocating tension that instantly hit the room was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. Mark completely froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a panicked ghost. Beside him, Lily's smug, arrogant smirk vanished in a millisecond, replaced by wide-eyed, undeniable terror. Mom, she's Uncle Richard's." Mark stammered, his voice suddenly pitching up an octave as he desperately scrambled to invent a new lie on the spot. "Oh, Mark, don't make yourself look any more pathetic than you already do," I interrupted smoothly. My voice was calm, steady, and chillingly cheerful. I didn't even look at him. I kept my eyes locked dead on Lily, watching her squirm in her chair. "Let's allow Lily to introduce herself properly, shall we?" I asked. Under the heavy linen tablecloth, my thumb pressed down on the play button. The massive 65-inch smart TV mounted on the living room wall directly behind them instantly flared to life. I had deliberately turned the surround sound speakers all the way up to max volume before anyone arrived. The high-definition, unedited footage from the hidden camera started blasting through the quiet dining room. There was no denying it. There was no explaining it away. It was a crystal-clear, undeniably explicit video of my husband and his homeless cousin aggressively tearing each other's clothes off right there on my velvet sofa. Mark let out a choked gasp, desperately lunging across the table to try and find the TV remote, knocking over his wine glass in the process. A dark red stain began bleeding across the pristine white tablecloth. But he was too late. The audio was already playing. Lily's whining, mocking voice echoed loudly over the elegant dinner table, bouncing off the walls for his entire family to hear. "I'm so tired of this, Mark. 2 whole years of hiding in cheap motels, and now I have to pretend to be related to you while your uptight wife treats me like a pathetic charity case? When are you finally going to divorce her?" Immediately followed by Mark's sickening, crystal-clear reply, "Soon. We just need to stick to the plan. My idiot wife is literally working herself to the bone to fund our lifestyle. It's the perfect setup." I calmly pressed pause on my phone screen. The video froze on a massive, high-definition frame of Mark kissing her neck. The sudden silence in the dining room was absolutely deafening. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The horrific reality of what they had just watched completely paralyzed the room. Sarah, his sister, had her hands clamped over her mouth in pure shock. His father looked like he was about to have a heart attack. I took a slow, elegant sip of my $300 vintage wine, savoring the rich taste. I carefully placed the glass back on the table and looked directly at my horrified mother-in-law. "Mary," I said, my voice echoing with cold, absolute authority. "Meet Lily, Mark's mistress of 2 years. And the parasite I am officially evicting from my house tonight." For what felt like an absolute eternity, the only sound in the entire dining room was Mark's heavy, panicked breathing. Then, the explosion happened. Mark's father, a normally quiet and deeply respected man, stood up so fast his heavy dining chair crashed backward onto the hardwood floor. His face was practically purple with pure, unadulterated rage. He marched around the table, grabbed Mark by the collar of his expensive tailored shirt, and slapped him hard across the face. The sound cracked like a whip through the room. "You absolute disgrace," his father spat, his voice shaking with fury. "You bring your whore into your wife's home, let her sleep under her roof, and then you have the sick audacity to invite us here to eat with her? You are no son of mine." Mark was practically hyperventilating, holding his red cheek. "Dad, wait, please. Let me explain. She manipulated me," he stammered, frantically pointing a shaking finger at Lily. But nobody was listening. Lily was frozen in her chair, her face completely pale, realizing that her entire parasitic operation had just been blown to pieces. I didn't even flinch at the chaos. I calmly reached down to my bag resting on the floor and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I tossed it right into the middle of the table, letting it land with a loud smack in the pool of spilled vintage red wine. "Those are the divorce papers," I announced, my voice slicing through the screaming. I looked down at Mark's pathetic, tear-stained face. "I have already drained the joint accounts, canceled your credit cards, and since my name is the only one on the deed to this property, you have absolutely zero legal right to be here." I slowly checked my watch, looking back up with a cold, dead stare. It is currently 6:25 p.m. I have already called the local police precinct. There is an officer sitting in a squad car at the end of the street waiting for my signal. If you and your parasite are not out of my house in exactly 10 minutes, I am having you both arrested for trespassing. Mark dropped to his knees right there on the dining room floor. The arrogant, smug man who had been laughing at me on the hidden camera just a few days ago was completely gone. He was a sobbing, pathetic mess. "Please, baby, please don't do this. I have nowhere to go. We can go to counseling," he begged, trying to grab the hem of my dress. Before I could even move, his sister Sarah stepped forward and aggressively kicked Mark's hand away. "Don't you dare touch her," she hissed with absolute disgust. Lily, finally realizing that she had completely lost her free ride and her ATM machine, scrambled out of her chair. She didn't say a word. She just sprinted upstairs to the guest room to pack. Mark, realizing that his own family was ready to physically throw him out themselves, desperately chased after her. I stood in the hallway with my arms crossed, watching them frantically stuff their clothes into garbage bags and Lily's designer suitcases. I made sure they didn't take a single item that I had paid for. Exactly 9 minutes later, they were stumbling toward the front door. Lily was sobbing, her perfect makeup ruined and running down her face, struggling to drag her heavy luggage out onto the cold, dark concrete driveway. Mark stopped at the threshold. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes wide with sheer panic and desperation, realizing he had just lost absolutely everything. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, grabbed the heavy oak door, and slammed it shut right in his face. The loud, metallic click of the deadbolt locking into place was the most beautiful, satisfying sound I have ever heard in my entire life. It has been exactly 6 months since that unforgettable Sunday dinner. 6 months since I finally took out the trash and completely reclaimed my sanctuary. The divorce was finalized surprisingly fast. The shark absolutely lived up to her reputation, completely obliterating any pathetic, desperate attempt Mark made to claim my assets or demand alimony. Because of the undeniable video evidence, the crystal-clear audio recording of their financial scheme, and my meticulous banking records, he walked away with absolutely nothing but the clothes on his back and a mountain of legal debt. As for his cousin, karma works incredibly fast when a parasite is finally cut off from its host. Without my paycheck funding her luxury organic groceries, designer perfumes, and lavish lifestyle, Lily's deep, undying love for Mark evaporated in less than 2 months. Through Mark's sister, Sarah, who I actually still grab coffee with every other week, I found out exactly how it ended. Lily cheated on Mark with a wealthy, 65-year-old divorced man she met at a hotel bar. She packed her bags and abandoned Mark in the middle of the night, leaving him completely heartbroken and stuck with a lease for a tiny, run-down apartment he couldn't even afford. Today, Mark is entirely broke, drowning in credit card debt, and completely cut off from his family. His father never forgave him for the utter disrespect, and his mother refuses to even say his name. He actually tried to call me from an unknown number a few weeks ago, leaving a pathetic, sobbing voicemail begging for my forgiveness and a second chance. I didn't even listen to the whole thing before I hit delete and permanently blocked him. Meanwhile, my life has never been better. The suffocating, heavy anxiety that used to choke me in my own home is completely gone. The air feels cleaner. I poured all of that dark energy into my career, and just last month, I was officially promoted to senior partner at my real estate firm. If there is one thing I want anyone listening to this story to take away from my nightmare, it's this. Never, ever ignore your woman's intuition. Your gut is a terrifyingly accurate compass. When someone tries to convince you that you are crazy, jealous, or paranoid in your own home, they're aggressively projecting their own guilt. Gaslighting is a weapon designed to make you fold, but it only works if you surrender your reality to them. Don't ever compromise your boundaries to keep the peace with someone who is secretly at war with you. When the disrespect gets loud, stop crying. Wipe your tears, put on a smile, and start quietly collecting your evidence. Because there is absolutely nothing more powerful and nothing more terrifying than a woman who knows her worth, knows the truth, and is patiently holding the remote control to ruin a liar's entire life.